Was Confucius the great leader we are led to think he was? Who was Confucius? Born in the year 551 BC in Qufu in the state of Lu, which is now located in China's Shandong province, he also died within the state of Lu in the year 479 BC at the age of 73. In this video, I will highlight the life of Confucius and the influence his method of teaching that still resonates today across many aspects of not only China but several countries of East Asia. Confucius was undoubtedly ancient China's most famous teacher, philosopher, and political theorist. His ideas profoundly influenced the civilization of East Asia. The life and teachings of Confucius were an expression of self-cultivation on the ability of personal effort to shape one's own destiny. But I offer you the question: was Confucius the great leader we are led to think he was? Confucius was hardly mentioned in the official annals and other historical sources of the spring and autumn period. Sources on his life are rare, mainly due to his not playing a conspicuous role in the late political world of that era. In fact, he was hardly mentioned because much of his life was spent either in exile or in preparation for his role in his later life. These gaps in historical records were a benefit to him because they encouraged scholars in later centuries to look deeper for traces that might reveal something of his life. This in reality often led to speculation or imaginative conjecture in favor of Confucius. An account written in the 3rd century BC describes him as a homeless dragon or yellow chi. Early Chinese history is full of writers such as this, who found the Analects as their source of information, understanding, and inspiration. The Analect is most closely associated with the work of Confucius. It is essentially a record of his life, written in fragments across 20 sections. The Analects were probably initially written within a century of the death of Confucius, possibly written by his younger disciples, although they were not completed until 200 or even 300 years later, after lots of tinkering to the original material. Confucius was born towards the end of the spring and autumn period of Chinese history in the state of Lu in what is today eastern China's Shandong province. The state of Lu was bound to the imperial court under the ruling Zhou dynasty, which existed from 1045 to 221 BC. Some reports suggest that Confucius's earlier ancestors were the Kongs from the state of Song. The Kongs were an aristocratic family that produced several eminent counselors for that dynasty. However, by the mid-7th century BC, the family had lost its wealth, and some of the family, including Confucius's own great-grandfather, had relocated to the state of Lu. While in the state of Lu, the Kong family was considered gentlefolk as they had lost their hereditary status and the entitlements that went with such a position. The gentlefolk of the period of the late Zhou dynasty could easily find employment as soldiers or in administrative positions. They had been educated in the 6 arts of ritual that included music, archery, charioteering, writing, and arithmetic. Despite this, they were still just one notch in society above the common people of that time. Confucius's father, Xu Lianghe, had been a warrior before serving as a district steward in the state of Lu. By the time Confucius was born, his father was already an old man. His father had been married previously, having 9 daughters, and his only son was disabled with a club foot. So the arrival of Confucius gave him a healthy heir. Xu Lianghe died soon after the birth of his son, which left his young widow to tend the family herself. Confucius later described his upbringing as being from a poor family of lowly station. Because of this, he could not enter government service as easily as young men from prominent families. So he strived to become skilled in many menial things. His first employer was a hereditary family of the Jisu clan, whose principal members had for decades served as chief counselors of the Lu rulers. Confucius secured a number of modest positions, which in turn led to the more important appointments of Minister of Works and later Minister of Crime within the Lu government. As the Minister of Crime, Confucius was instrumental in handling problems of law and order. He also excelled in diplomatic assignments, knowing how to be prepared for the unexpected and situations that could escalate into more dangerous situations. He was also able to advise his superiors on bringing difficult negotiations to a successful conclusion. He resigned after a few years after a period of struggle between the hereditary families. These families had for years been trying to wrestle power away from the legitimate rulers of the state of Lu. Confucius objected to such actions, and in 498 BC, Confucius was left with no choice but to resign his position and his home. Confucius went into a period of self-exile, first traveling to the neighboring state of Wei, then onto the states of Song, Chen, and Sai. This journey took him 14 years, and most of the time Confucius was looking for rulers who were willing to accept his influence and be guided by his vision of virtuous government. Though his search for these principles was ultimately in vain, he refused to give up, for he was eager to find someone to put him to use. Confucius had the belief that he could set things right in the world. He was born at a time when such aspirations were within reach of those in circumstances similar to his. By the middle of the 6th century BC, the Zhou dynasty was approaching 500 years of existence with a political system held together by family ties. The system was still effective, but in danger of eventual collapse if not fully shored up. The rulers of each state, themselves relatives of the Zhou king, should have been the strongest supporters of Confucius, but they chose to follow their own ambitions by keeping enemies at bay. In the decades before Confucius was born, this worked, but by the time Confucius had grown into an adult, these leaders had passed on and been replaced by ones not thinking about the long-term security of the empire. Petty feuds erupted, which consumed most of their time, and the remainder of their time was consumed by lethargy. This was also evident in the aristocratic classes. Once fully supportive of the leaders, they were becoming brazen and willing to compete with their rulers for wealth. This level of apathy and ineptitude allowed common gentlefolk such as Confucius to step in and take charge of the government's administration. People such as Confucius were not able to displace the aristocrats, but if they worked hard and were smart, they could, however, exert influence in political situations. The smarter members of this new breed of gentlefolk were able to go further and instill their ideas about their worth and nobleness. This in turn could be used to challenge the existing social hierarchy. Through his teaching, Confucius was asking whether ability and strength of character were suitable measures of a person's wealth, and if men of noble rank should be stripped of their titles and privileges for their incompetence and moral indiscretions. Confucius and others like him wanted to change the unspoken rules that would favor the virtuous and competent. Confucius believed that the moral resolve of a few could ultimately benefit many. He stated that integrity alone was not enough. Good men had also to be capable in politics and should have adequate skills in knowledge as well as serving their masters. Shandong, the brother of the founder of the Zhou dynasty, was someone Confucius looked upon as his inspirational guide. Despite the centuries between them, Confucius believed he wanted the same things for the dynasty: social harmony and political stability, grounded in trust and mutual moral obligations. The big difference between them was their social standing. Shandong was royalty, and Confucius was nothing more than a professional bureaucrat with limited political authority. Even his authority was transient, depending upon whether or not he had a job within the government. Even with a government job, Confucius was not of a political standing to host a feast or take part in any of the living components of the social order envisioned by Shandong and strongly endorsed by Confucius. During his travels on his exile, Confucius was accompanied by a small band of disciples who were also his fiercest critics. These disciples were somewhat younger than him, from a range of backgrounds, who chose to attach themselves to him in order to learn his skills that might enable them to get started on a political career. To these followers, Confucius was the master. They called themselves his disciples or apprentices. Three that stood out were named Zigong, Zilu, and Yanhui. Zigong had previously been a merchant, was articulate and shrewd. He enjoyed his company as he could share his thoughts on the world with him, whereas Zilu was a little less refined. Brave and loyal, he would do anything to protect his master. While Confucius felt being brave and loyal alone were not strong enough virtues to be considered good, as judgment could easily be misguided into something with a violent outcome. Yanhui was from a poor family and was content to learn no matter what hardships he endured. The three of them left behind their homes in the state of Lu to follow Confucius into the unknown, with their futures uncertain. The journey. Zilu had relatives in the state of Wei, and he hoped they could introduce Confucius to the state's ruler. There were also other powerful people in the service of the ruler who knew of the reputation of Confucius and were willing to assist him. But not one of these connections landed Confucius with a job. Part of the problem was Confucius himself, unwilling to pursue paths that might obligate him to those who could create problems rather than aid him. The ruler of the state of Wei was not interested in finding anyone who could provide counsel for him, as he was more concerned with distractions in the form of conflicts with neighboring states. Confucius was patient and waited for 4 years before he was granted an audience with the ruler, but the meeting had a disappointing outcome when it was confirmed to Confucius that this ruler had flaws in his character and judgment. Not long after the meeting, the ruler died, and with no further reason to remain, Confucius and his disciples travelled south to the state of Chen. The time spent in the state of Chen was 3 uneventful years until a major war erupted, and they travelled further west to the state of Chu. On the way, they exhausted their provisions, and together with his followers, they became too weak to continue. Once recovered, they only reached the border of the state of Chu before turning back, retracing their steps through Chen and then Wei. This journey took them another 3 years, and on reaching Wei, they remained for another 2 years. While Confucius remained in the state of Wei, 2 of his closest disciples, Zigong and Ran Chui, returned to the state of Lu and take up employment in their home state's government. Zigong proved his worth in diplomacy, and Ran Chui did likewise in warfare. It is probable that these two of his closest allies approached the ruler and chief counselor of Lu to make a generous offer to entice Confucius back to the state of Lu. This worked. The Zhuazuan, an early source on the history of the period, noted that in the 11th year of the reign of Duke Ai of Lu in 484 BC, a letter arrived from the Duke containing a generous sum as a gift to persuade Confucius to return home, which he did. Upon his return to the state of Lu, Confucius found himself in demand, as he was now regarded as the state's elder, or Guolao. He was either approached directly for advice or sought the same advice through his disciples. The number of Confucius's disciples multiplied many times. The success of Zhegong and Rantui helped enhance the reputation of Confucius as a teacher who could prepare young men for careers in politics. However, many of those drawn to him often found themselves asking questions about his style of teaching rather than how they could advance their careers. Questions asked were on virtue, moral requisites such as serving in government, and the meaning of phrases attributed to Confucius. Still more wanted to know how they could pursue knowledge. His style of teaching was totally in tune with what Confucius believed to be the role of a teacher. A teacher could only point out one corner of a square, and it was up to the students to find the other three. To teach is to impart light, to provide guidance and entice students forward so they continue to learn even when they are tired and do not simply give up. Confucius said of himself, he is the type of man that forgets to eat when trying to solve a problem and forgets his worries as he does not become aware of old age. As old age did approach him, Confucius discovered he was free of earlier constraints. He set himself over his conduct and judgment. At the age of 70, he followed his heart, and while not free of care, he rejoiced his life and had continued despite many setbacks. He died at the age of 73 in the year 479 BC. That is all for this video. If you have enjoyed watching and it has shown you a little detail of life here in China, then your subscribing to my channel would mean a lot to me. Thank you for watching. Make sure you click on the link. Till the next video, and until the next time, goodbye for now.